So, Kris, good morning. Um,
Morning.
it's nice to see you. I really enjoyed reading your book, Our Last Blue Moon. Like a lot of people who knew Alan, this was a very bittersweet reading. I felt like it gave me a strong insight not only to your relationship, but to Alan's last few days, which were very precious to me. It's clear to me that this is an extended love letter to Alan and a documentation of your lives together. Um, it grows out of the larger process of you meeting him, loving him, losing him, and then recovering from the loss. And that was a long and very lengthy process. I'm wondering if you could tell us how it feels to hold the book as someone, as the outcome of that process.
Oh, it's miraculous.
Hmm.
Just to think that all those years with him, all the years writing about him and us, to then just be compressed, and contained in this little object was really exciting and thrilling, but it still hasn't quite sunk in because I've never written a book before.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. Well, can you tell us a little bit about the process of writing this book, like when it started and how you decided that it was time to write a book about this?
well, I was walking around with all this grief, and, it just sort of felt like I was being invaded by it. And I needed to do something with it. I needed to say, okay, grief, you and I have to have a conversation here.
Okay. There you
Okay.
go.
That and if I was going to not be consumed by this grief, I had to relate to it, and I had to make something out of it, which
Mhm.
is very compatible with my training as a dancer of expression, as a
Mhm.
psychotherapist, to explore feelings, to have a relationship with one's inner life. And so I started really writing after finding these love letters from Alan that he had written to me that first summer that we met in California. And one of them is in the very opening of the book. And I started reading those, and I wanted to answer them as if it was the first time I had received them.
Mhm.
And so that started a process, what could be called journaling,
Mhm.
and where you actively engage emotions through writing. And so after I did that for a while, I then decided that I wanted to try to write the story, and to write the story of the hospital and the suddenness of Alan's death. But I also wanted to write the love story, because that happened just as suddenly and unexpectedly. So it's sort of those two chunks. The first 2 weeks I met Alan, and the last 2 weeks I was with him in the hospital. So I started writing about that, and I found myself enjoying it. And I would cry through it, but at the same time, I thought, oh, that's a terrible sentence. But it's okay. I'm not a writer. I can just let anything out any way I want. And then I just got bored with it. And I thought, no, this needs to be structured and carved out. And I need to find more ways of saying this. And so I just sort of fell in love with writing in that process of grieving, which was very surprising to me. And I had no idea I was writing a book
Yeah.
until Susan Shreve told me, after looking at some of it, Kris, you're writing a book. And I said, no, I'm not writing a book. I'm not a writer. And she said, you have a book here. It took me a while to believe her.
Mhm. So I like the way that you parallel that because, you know, the first 2 weeks that you met him and the last 2 weeks that you
Yes.
were with him. I think that's really beautifully stated. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about how you decided to structure the book, because one of the things I really enjoyed was the way that you balanced both the joy and the grief. I would
Mhm.
be reading a chapter and, you know, I was just at the point where I was feeling this intense emotion of loss. And then I
Mm,
would turn the page and you would be writing about a section early in your relationship. And
yeah.
it seems like almost the two incidents kind of parallel to come to the end of the beginning.
Yes. It's sort of like time kind of collapsed for me as I was writing it. Yeah, so in the hospital, I was trying to cheer Alan up, and I did some funny things in there
Mhm, mhm, mhm,
to try to get in a positive place. But one of the things I started talking to him about was the first summer we met, and he loved hearing the story, and we would talk about it. And so that it's it was the telling of the story to him and reminiscing and remembering that helped us get through some of those hard moments. And and the memories just came back. I hadn't really thought about that summer in a while. It had been 25 years that we'd been together. So it wasn't something that was fresh on my mind. But as I was in the hospital with him and I had so much time to reflect and to, um, you know, be with him, just the two of us in a, it was very, very intimate, but completely different from any way we'd ever been together before in this hospital room. And so all of these memories just came forward. And I thought it was really important to balance, um, the shock of his death and the tragedy of his death with, uh, you know, all the years that had been so happy. And to leave that out would be an imbalance, would not be the whole picture.
mhm. Okay, thank you. It becomes clear through the story that you became Alan's first reader and that you were familiar with his work. He talked about what he was working on. You shared the work that you were doing. You were clearly two artists living together. And I guess in that respect, it's not a surprise to me that you ended up being a writer because, you know, I would imagine that an artist who's skilled in one area could also be skilled in another. But have you had what some might call writerly urges before this book? For example, did you write as a child or a young
I
adult?
did. I kept diaries as a child. My life growing up was so complicated and moving around a lot that I had to keep records so I could remember. I wanted to remember where I was and what had just happened. And I liked recording feelings and emotions. And I wrote. I loved to write little essays about ballerinas in those days before I knew anything about modern dance. And so I remember writing about Anna Pavlova and
Mm,
just sort of dreaming about becoming a ballerina and being the dying swan. So I wrote about dance as a child as I was dreaming about becoming a dancer. And maybe those are some of my earliest writings were about dance.
excellent. Excellent. The other thing that comes through is your strength, and it's a gentle, persistent strength. You talk early on the book about your transition from the marriage that you were in when you met Alan to making a solid decision to leave that relationship, um, even before you and Alan had, you know, come to any understanding that something was going to happen.
Yeah.
And then after his death, there's a lot of strength and resilience there. Can you tell us about the book and its reflection on you as a person and your strengths as a woman now alone?
Well, you know, in psychology, there are a lot of studies that are trying to discover the resilience gene. So I think I may have that gene. I think it comes from my mother, whose second husband died of a heart attack in her arms when she was 38 years old. And she packed us up 6 weeks later and took us to Florida for 3 weeks. And then when we came back, she bought a stereo and a lot of records, and we started having parties. That's sort of one of my models for, you know, standing up in the face of something like this. But also, you know, I have so much in my life that is meaningful. And in friends, my stepchildren, Alan's children, my grandchildren, his grandchildren, you know, I was not about to collapse on them. And so I just conjured up that Mickey in me. My mother's name was Mickey, and I'm not going to Florida. But I'm going to use this situation to deepen my understanding of you know, life, and how life, you never know what's going to happen, and just to try to embrace it instead of push it away. And my friends, my family, I've had so much support, and my work, my psychotherapy practice. I just, you know, saw myself letting this brokenheartedness come into my treatment room as a way of entering into other people's pain and suffering, and to feel it even more with them. And of course, with the pandemic, that's extended even more. So it's been a kind of a deepening. The resilience is not just about being tough and not having any emotions and not crying yourself to sleep at night, but it's about, you know, having compassion for your own suffering and those of others. And that is very much part of my training as a psychotherapist, but also part of my spiritual practice in meditation and yoga. So there's a sturdiness that comes from, you know, these other disciplines, plus just feeling still loved by Alan and still being in love with him. It's pretty cool.
That's wonderful. I'd like for you to talk a little bit about your careers, because that surprised me. I don't know how I've spent so much time with you in the last, 6 years, and I didn't realize that you were a masseuse, and I knew you were a psychotherapist, but one of the things that comes clear in the book is that, everyone was unprepared for what happened. Of course, they should have been. This was an accident. It wasn't like Alan was ill. But you said that writing helped you heal. And I'm wondering about how psychotherapy and your training might have helped that as well. And in creating the book, if you could show the way, how you show the way that as a creative person, dance, choreography, and writing have all kind of come together to help in this process.
Yeah. I mean, one of the benefits of aging is that things don't seem so separate now. Here are the arts, here's healing, here's, psychotherapy. So the more I've lived and worked with these different approaches to being human, the more they've all sort of melded together and integrated. So I don't think of them so much as being separate anymore. And, you know, in terms of healing from a tragic event, a shock like this, another wonderful thing that has happened in the field of psychotherapy is so much more understanding of trauma. You know, Freud was a neuroscientist first. So the information that we have about the brain and what happens in the body when one goes through severe shock, we know so much about that now. And we know through a lot of research in mind-body healing how the mind and the body are not separate. So the body, there's a wonderful book by a very famous neuroscientist. His name is Bessel van der Kolk, and he has a book called The Body Keeps Score. And it's really true. The body holds it all. I used to say to Alan, I wanted to do workshops with some of his writers and get them expressing and moving their body. Because he was also very held in himself. So I often had to come in this office where I'm sitting now in his chair and spin him around and shake him up a bit. So that's kind of what one approach to trauma is, to, you know, listen deeply to the body. And there's so many approaches to healing from trauma. I couldn't begin to name all of them. But one of them is to try and make sense, cognitive sense of what has happened. And so writing can be a really good way to do that. If you tell the love story with Alan is the beginning, then we go through the middle of our life together in Washington, then we get to this tragic ending, and now here I am talking to you. So if I write about that and make a structure out of it, the same way I would make a dance, a beginning, middle, and end. And then there's the story. It's the story in the body. It's the story in what has happened. And then the mind can start to, it kind of congeals, you know, it becomes, there's not as much separation from what happened on the outside and what's going on inside, because we're integrating the experience. And there are many, many ways to do that. And not everybody will do it in writing, but that is part of a trauma approach that can help restore and bring more equilibrium to the nervous system, just to balance everything up. So we're not living only in the moment of the tragic event and all the adrenaline and the cortisol surging through our body and making us, you know, just in a either a state of shock, freeze, or as they call it, fight flight, where we run away.
Okay. Absolutely. Absolutely. I know that you wrote some, you know, preliminary essays as you were writing this book to work on the themes of it. And I'm wondering, are you planning to do more nonfiction?
Well, I have started writing a few sketches, and I don't know where that will go yet. I still feel very attached to this book. And there's something about letting go of this book and starting something new that it's gonna take a little time, because I don't know that I could ever write something that would be so compelled to write as I did this particular subject matter. But who knows? I just think I need a little more time.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Do you imagine yourself writing fiction in the future?
Well, I've imagined it, but I think it's really hard. And there were times when I was writing the memoir when I wanted to start making up things. And I knew I couldn't do that. No, this is a memoir. As much as you can trust memory, you have to be true to that. But there are a couple of little, let's say, explorations that might exaggerate a couple of things in a memoir. But to write fiction, I'd have to start with something like one of those, what's it called, flash fiction, one page, or something very short.
Yeah. Well, to be sure, you have a beautiful writerly voice, and it's wise and self-knowing, and it would really be a shame that it would go silent. So I really hope that you will continue to write.
Well, thanks, Deb. That's encouraging.
Yes, yes. So I understand that you're donating the initial proceeds from the publication to the Alan Cheuse International Writers Center. And the center is celebrating its 5th year now, and the book is to sort of launch that celebration. Can you tell us a little bit about the center and your sense of connection to it?
Well, I remember Alan talking about wishing his students could have a broader range of experience in the wider world, to enhance their knowledge about the world and other cultures. And I know that he and Bill Miller talked a lot about this before he died. And of course, Alan is kind of a walking International Writers Center within himself. If you see all these books, you see his curiosity about writers internationally, and of course his own beginnings as a teacher and academically was, in comparative literature, and his fascination with Latin American writers. So I was always very aware of, and he would throw these books on my desk, of writers from Africa and Japan and all these other places, and I'd never heard of these writers. And I thought, oh, this is important. We should know about these writers. So that's sort of the earliest connection, was just through Alan educating me about a broader literary world. So then immediately after his death, it seemed that Bill got the ball rolling, and this dream turned into a reality so quickly, alongside my beginning to write my memoir. So it's like these two things were happening at the same time. And, I can't even begin to say how thrilled I was that the center was formed, because it just represents the epitome of what Alan was about. And it's such a, when you think about the world now, what's happened, it's even more relevant. I mean, we have to be able to talk about empathy and compassion. We have to know more about other cultures and how we're all one big heart, and not just these separate languages and, ways of thinking and being. But so when the center was first formed, it was mostly about, sending students to other countries to do research for their own novels, or just to enhance their understanding. And so, but then the way it's grown with Matt Davis has just been astonishing to me. All these programs have just sprouted and bloomed, like, the writers that are coming from other countries to George Mason, and the bringing writers from war-torn countries here, and just the emphasis on translation. I mean, it's much bigger than Alan thought of 2 or 3 students going to France, you know.
Mhm.
So it's thrilling for me, and to have it in Alan's name, it's such an honor. And he would just be, I know he knows about this from some star out there. He's smiling.
Great. Well, Kris O'Shee, thank you for this
Mhm.
time. Your new book is Our Last Blue Moon. It is published, the first publication of Watershed Lit Press.